This book is called Paradise by Edna O'Brien. I read it while I was in Cornwall. I think that is the perfect reading for holidays. And it's this collection of small favorite stories. So, what is the topic? An unnamed protagonist is on holidays with her new, much married lover in the company of the monstrously rich. How long would she last? It would be uppermost in all their minds. Each day, while the others are at sea, she's taught to swim. Eventually, she will be expected to perform. The pressure mounts. It is only a matter of time before she snaps. Edna O'Brien crafts a quietly horrifying scene of eroticism and insecurity and makes one woman's near fatal discomfort stand for society's larger trap. So, I'm going to start. In the harbor were the 4 boats named after a country, a railroad, an emotion, and a girl. She first saw them at sundown. Very beautiful they were and tranquil. White boats at a distance from each other, cosseting the harbor. On the far side, a mountain. Lilac at the moment, it seemed to be made of collapsible substance, so insubstantial was it. Between the boats and the mountain, a lighthouse on an island. Somebody said the light was not nearly so pretty as in the old days when the Coast Guard lived there and worked it by gas. It was automatic now and much brighter. Between them and the sea were 4 fields cultivated by fig trees. Dry yellow fields that seemed to be exhaling dust, no grass. She looked again at the 4 boats, the fields, the fig trees, the suave ocean. She looked at the house behind her and she thought, it can be mine, mine. And her heart gave a little somersault. He recognized her agitation and smiled. The house acted like a spell on all who came. He took her by the hand and led her up the main stairs. Stone stairs with a wobbly banister, the undersides of each step bright blue. Stop, he said, where it got dark near the top, and before he switched on the light. A servant had unpacked for her. There were flowers in the room, the smell of confectionery. In the bathroom, a great glass urn filled with talcum powder. She leaned over the rim and inhaled. It caused her to sneeze 3 times. Ovaries of dark purple soap had been taken out of the wrapping paper, and for several minutes she held one in either hand. Yes, she had done the right thing in coming. She need not have feared. He needed her. His expression and their clasped hands already confirmed that. They sat on the terrace drinking a cocktail he had made. It was of rum and lemon and proved to be extremely potent. One of the guests said the angle of light on the mountain was at its most magnificent. He put his finger to his lips and blew a kiss to the mountain. She counted the peaks, 13 in all, with a plateau between the first 4 and the last 9. The peaks were close to the sky. Farther down on the face of the mountain, various yachts stuck out, and these made shadows on their neighboring yachts. She was told its name. At the same moment, she overheard a question being put to a young woman. Are you interested in Mary, Queen of Scots? The woman, whose skin had a beguiling radiance, answered yes over readily. It was possible that such radiance was the result of constant supplies of male sperm. The man had a high, pale forehead and a look of death. They drank, they smoked. All 12 smokers tossing the boats onto the tiled roof that sloped toward the farm buildings. Summer lighting started up. It was random and quiet and faintly theatrical. It seemed to be something devised for their amusement. It lit one part of the sky, then another. There were bats flying about also, and their dark shapes and the random fugitive shots of summer lightning were a distraction and gave them something to point to. If I had a horse, I'd call it summer lightning, one of the women said, and the man next to said her, how charming. She knew she ought to speak. She wanted to, both for his sake and for her own. Her mind would give a little leap and be still and would leap again. Words were struggling to be set free, to say something, a little amusing something to establish her among them. But her tongue was tied. They would know her predecessors. They would compare her minutely, her appearance, her accent, the way he behaved with her. They would know better than she how important she was to him, if it were serious or just a passing notion. They had all read in the gossip column how she came to meet him, how he had gone to have an X-ray and met her there, the radiographer in white, committed to a dark room and films showing lungs and pulmonary tracts. Am I right in thinking you are to take swimming lessons? A man asked, choosing the moment when she had leaned back and was staring up at the big pine tree. Yes, she said, wishing that he had not been told. There is nothing to it, you just get in and swim, he said. How surprised they all were, surprised and amused. Asked where she had lived and if it was really true. Can't imagine anyone not swimming as a child. Can't imagine anyone not swimming, period. Nothing to it, you just fight. The sun filtered by the green needles fell and made play on the dense clusters of brown nuts. They never ridicule nature, she thought. They never dare. He came and stood behind her, his hand patting her bare, pale shoulder. A man who was not holding a camera pretended to take a photograph of them. How long would she last? It would be uppermost in all their minds. We'll take you on the boat tomorrow, he said. They could. They all went to such pains, such excesses to describe the cruiser. They competed with each other to tell her. They were really telling him, she thought. I should be honest, say I do not like the sea, say I'm inland person, that I like rain and roses in a field, thin rain, and through the roses and the vegetation, and for me the sea is dark as the shell of mussels and signifies catastrophe. But she couldn't. It must be wonderful, was what she said. It's quite something, he said shyly. At dinner she sat at one end of the egg-shaped table, he at the other. 6 white candles in glass sconces separated them. The secretary had arranged the places. A fat woman on his right wore a lot of silver bracelets and was veiled in crepe. They had cold soup to start with. The garnishing was so finely chopped that it was impossible to identify each one except by its flavors. She slipped out of her shoes. A man describing his trip to India dwelt for an unnaturally long time on the disgustness of the food. He had gone to see the temples. Another man who was repeatedly tried to bow them up threw the question to the table at large. Which of the Mediterranean ports is best to dock at? Everyone has a favorite. Some picked ports where exciting things had happened. Some chose ports where the approach was most beguiling. Harbor fees were compared as a matter of interest. The man who had asked the question amused them all with an account of a cruise he had made once with his young daughter and how he was unable to land when they got to Venice because of inebriation. She had to admit that she didn't know any ports. They were touched by that confession. We're going to try them all, he said from the opposite end of the table, and keep a logbook. People looked from him to her and smiled knowingly. That night, behind closed shutters, they enacted their ride. They were both impatient to get there. Long before the coffee had been brought, they had moved away from the table and contrived to be alone, choosing the stone seat that grilled the pine tree. The seat was smeared all over with the three transparent gum. The knots bobbing together made a dull clatter like castanets. They sat for as long as courtesy required, then they retired. In bed, she felt safe again, united to him not only by passion and by pleasure, but by some more radical entanglement. She had no name for it, that puzzling emotion that was more than love, or perhaps less, that was not simply sexual, although sex was vital to it, and held it together like wires supporting a broken bowl. They both had had many breakages and therefore loved with a wary superstition. "Oh, what do you do to me?" he said. "How you know me, all my vibrations." "I think we are connected underneath," she said quietly. She often thought he hated her for implicating him in something too tender, but he was not hating her then. At length, it was necessary to go back to her bedroom because he had promised to get up early to spear fishing with the men. As she kissed him goodbye, she caught sight of herself in the chrome surface of the coffee flask which was on his bedside table. Eyes emitting satisfaction and chagrin and panic were that stared back at her. Each time as she left him, she expected not to see him again. Each parting promised to be final. The men left soon after 6. She heard car doors because she had been unable to sleep. In the morning, she had her first swimming lesson. It was arranged that she would take it when the others sat down to breakfast. Her instructor had been brought from England. She asked if he slept well. She did not ask where. The servants disappeared from the house late at night and departed toward the settlement of low-roof buildings. The dog went with them. The instructor told her to go backward down the metal stepladder. There were wasps hovering about, and she thought that if she were get stung, she could bypass the lesson. But no wasp obliged. Some children who had been swimming earlier had left their plastic toys. A yellow ring that craned into the neck and head of a dog. It was a dog with a thoroughly disgusted expression. There was a blue dolphin with a name painted on it and all kinds of battleships. They were the children of the guests. The older ones, who were boys, took no notice of any of the adults and moved about, raucous and meddlesome, taking full advantage of every aspect of the place. At night, they watched the lizards patiently and for hours. In the heat of the day, they remained in the water. In the early morning, they gathered almonds for which they received from him a harvesting fee. One black flipper lurked on the bottom of the pool. She looked down at it and touched it with her toe. Those were her last unclaimed moments, those moments before the lesson began. The instruction told her to sit in it as if it were a bath. He crouched and slowly she crouched too. "Now hold your nose and put your head under the water," he said. She pulled the bathing cap well over her ears and forehead to protect her hairstyle, and with her nose gripped too tightly, she went underneath. "Feel it?" he said excitedly. "Feel the water holding you up?" She felt no such a thing. She felt the water engulfing her. He told her to press the water from her eyes. He was gentleness itself. Then he dived in, swam a few strokes, and stood up, shaking the water from his gray hair. He took her hands and walked backwards until they were at arm's length. He asked her to lie on her stomach and give herself to it. He promised not to let go of her hands. Each time, on the verge of doing so, she stopped. First her body, then her mind refused. She felt if she was to take her feet off the ground, the unmentionable would happen. "What do I fear?" she asked herself. "Death," she said, and yet it wasn't that. It was as if some horrible experience would happen before her actual death. She thought perhaps it might be the fight she would put up. When she succeeded in stretching out for one desperate minute, he proclaimed with joy, But that first lesson was a failure as far as she was concerned. Walking back to the house, she realized it was a mistake to have allowed an instructor to be brought. He put too much emphasis on it. It would be incumbent upon her to conquer it. They would concern themselves with her progress, not because they cared, but like the summer lighting or the jazz going by, it would be something to talk about. But she could not send the instructor home. He was an old man and he had never been abroad before. Already he was marveling at the scenery. He had to go on with it. Going back to the terrace, she was not sure of her feet on land. She was not sure of land itself. It seemed to sway, and her knees shook uncontrollably. When she sat down to breakfast, she found that a saucer of almonds had been peeled for her. They were very sweet and fresh, re-invoking the sweetness and freshness of a country morning. They tasted like hazelnuts. She said so. Nobody agreed. Nobody disagreed. Some were reading the papers. Now and then some read a piece aloud, some amusing piece about some acquaintance of theirs who had done a dizzy, newsworthy thing. The children read the thermometer and argued about the pencil shadow on the sundial. The temperature was already in the 80s. The women were forming a plan to go on the speedboat to get their midriffs brown. She declined. He called her into the conservatory and said she might give some time to supervising the meals because the secretary had rather a lot to do. Passion flower leaves were stretched along the roof on lifelines of green cord, each leaf like the 5 fingers of a hand, green and yellow fingers on the same hand. No flowers, flowers later, flowers that would live a day, or so the gardener had said. She said, I hope we will be here to see one. If you want, we will, he said, but of course, he might take a notion and go. He never knew what he might do. No one knew. When she entered the vast kitchen, the first thing the servant did was to smile. Women in black with soft-soled shoes, all smiling, no complicity in any of those smiles. She had brought with her a phrase book, a notebook, and an English cookery book. The kitchen was like a laboratory. Various white machines stationed against the walls, refrigerators chortling at different speeds, a fan over each of the electric cookers, the red and green lights on the dials faintly menacing, and if they were about to issue an alarm. There was a huge fish on the table. It had been speared that morning by the men. Its mouth was open, its eyes so close together that they barely missed being one eye, its lower lip gaping pathetically. The fins were black and matted with oil. They all stood and looked at it, she and the 7 or 8 willing women to whom she must make herself understood. When she sat to copy the recipe from the English book and translate it into their language, they turned on another fan. Already they were shopping for the evening meal. 3 young girls chopped onions, tomatoes, and peppers. They seemed to take pleasure in their task. They seemed to smile into the mounds of vegetables that they so diligently chopped. There were 8 picnic baskets to be taken on the boat, an armful of towels. The children begged to be allowed to carry the towels. He had the zip bag with the wine bottles. He shook the bag so that the bottles rattled in the surrounds of eyes. The guest smiled. He had a way of drawing people into his mood without having to say or do much. Conversely, he had a way of locking people out. Both things were mesmerizing. They crossed the 4 fields that led to the sea. The figs were hard and green. The sun played like a blow lamp upon her back and neck. He said that she would have to lather herself in suntan oil. He seemed oddly hostile, his saying it out loud like that in front of the others. As they got nearer the water, she felt her heart race. The water was all shimmer. Some swam out, some got in the rowboat. Trailing her hand in the crinkled surface of the water, she thought, it's not a cramped jellyfish or broken glass that I fear. It's something else. A ladder was dropped down at the side of the boat for the swimmers to climb in from the sea. Sandals had to be kicked off as they stepped inside. The floor was of blonde wood and burning hot. Swimmers have to have their feet inspected for tar marks. The boatman stood with a pad cotton soaked in turpentine, ready to rub the marks. The men busied themselves. One helped to get the engine going, a couple put awnings up, others carried out large strip cushions and scattered them under the awnings. 2 boys refused to come on board. "It is pleasant to bash my little brother up under water," a young boy said, his voice at once menacing and melodious. She smiled and went down the stairs where there was a kitchen and sleeping quarters with beds for 4. He followed her. He looked, inhaled deeply, and murmured. "Take it out," she said. "I want it now, now." Timorous and wind-mad. How he loved it. How he loved that imperative. He pushed the door and she watched as he struggled to take down his shorts but could not then the cord undone. He was the awkward one now. How he stumbled. She waited for one excruciating moment and made him wait. Then she knelt and she began, he muttered between the clenched teeth. He who could tame animals was defenseless in this. She applied herself to it, sucking, 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 with all the hunger that she felt and all the simulated hunger that she liked him to think she felt. Threatening to maim him, she always just grazed with the edge of her fine, square teeth. Nobody intruded. It took no more than a minute. She stayed behind for a decent interval. She felt thirsty. On the window ledge there were paperback books and bottles of sun oil. Also, a spare pair of shorts that had name of all the likely things in the world printed on them. Name of drinks and capital cities and the flags of each nation. The sea, through the porthole, was a small, harmless globule of blue. They passed out of the harbor, away from the 3 other boats and the settlement of pines. Soon there was only sea and rock, no reedy inlets, no towns. Mile after mile of hallucinating sea. The madness of mariners conveyed itself to her, the illusion that it was land and that she could traverse it, a land that led to nowhere. The rocks had been reduced to every shape the eye and the mind could comprehend. Near the water there were openings that had been forced through by the sea, some rapacious, some large enough for a small boat to slink under, some as small and settling as the sockets of ice. The trees of sheer faces of these rocks were no more than a struggle to be trees. Birds could not perch there, let alone nest. She tried not to remember the swimming lesson, to postpone remembering until the afternoon, until the next lesson. She came out and joined them. A young girl sat at the stern among the cushions playing a guitar. She wore long silver spatula-shaped earrings, a self-appointed gypsy. The children were playing I Spy by finding it hard to locate new objects. They were confined to the things they could see around them. By standing, she found that the wind and the spray from the water kept her cool. The mountains that were far away appeared insubstantial, but those that they were near, glinted with the sharp stones, were pierced by the sun. "I find it a little unreal," she said to one of the men. "Beautiful, but unreal." She had to shout because of the noise of the engine. "I don't know what you mean by unreal," he said. Their repertoire was small but effective. In the intonation the sting lay, dreadfully subtle, impossible to bridle over. In fact, the unnerving thing about it was the terrible bewilderment it included. Was it intended or not? She distinctly remembered a sensation of once thinking that her face was laced by cobweb, but being unable to feel it with the hand and being unable to put a finger on their purulence felt exactly the same. To each other, too, they transmitted small malices and then moved on the next topic. They mostly talked of places they had been to the people who were there, and though they talked endlessly, they told nothing about themselves. I'm going to leave it there for the next time. I will continue reading it.